So now we're going to look at Bennett and the response to the Depression. We've got to remember that a depression like this had never existed before really in history, so they don't really know how to deal with it. They just think it's going to iron itself out. Our first Prime Minister, Mackenzie King, during this time period, the first Prime Minister we're going to study in this time period, Mackenzie King, makes a famous 5-cent speech and says, I'm not going to give a 5-cent piece to any government that has a Tory at its head. So he basically shows that he has no care for those people living in provinces that aren't liberals like he is. And so he's actually thrown out of office because so many poor people go, oh, we need the Prime Minister to care about all of us as a whole. Now, Bennett gets into power. He's not much better. He's a self-made millionaire who believes that poverty actually is character building for people. He's a millionaire. He doesn't know what to do. So at one point, he eventually copies the United States and creates a New Deal where he dumps around $20 million into public works projects. But people are so destitute during this period that they actually write to him saying, Prime Minister, I need help. I need everything from underwear to flowers for my girlfriend to just a few dollars for food. And he actually takes money out of his own wallet and sends it to these people. So it shows he was caring. He just had no ability to understand what to do to fix this problem. He does balance the budget at one point. We now realize that government spending can actually kickstart people out of a depression. He creates many work camps which pay about 20 cents a day, and it's more to keep unemployed men out of the cities from causing trouble. The conditions in these work camps are so horrible, they're so lice-infested, dirty, the food is terrible, that it eventually prompts the On to Ottawa trek and the Regina riot. So a bunch of people start in Vancouver, get out of these work camps, board the train and say, we're going to Ottawa to have a conference with the Prime Minister. So on their way to Ottawa, they got stopped in Regina. They're put in a giant sports stadium there by the police, the army, etc. The leaders of the On to Ottawa trek go on to Ottawa, meet with Prime Minister Bennett, and say, you are unfit to govern this country. Well, that really doesn't go well as a meeting, and they're sent back to Regina, and there's a riot in Regina, all of these unhappy people, and somebody is killed, one person killed. So what are some of the political solutions to the Depression? Well, the Union Nationale, which is a party in Quebec, doesn't really have a very good political situation. They say people are looking for economic situations. They're turning to ideas like communism. So instead of allowing communists to thrive in Canada, we're going to blame the English for all of our problems. And if you are communist, we are going to put a padlock on your business. We're going to destroy your printing presses if you're a communist newspaper, and you can be sent to jail. So they blacklist them. Not really a great solution. It just shows that they're very old and traditional. The CCF forms as a political solution to the Depression. It now is what we would call the NDP. J.S. Wordsworth, its leader, he's socialist. He believes in job creation programs, nationalizing key industries, so taking key industries and making them run by the government, and any sort of socialist philosophy that you would think of in this time period. The next solution is the Social Credit Party, led by Bible Bill Aberhart, who has a great radio show. He's a celebrity across Canada, and he says, let's give people $25 to spend a month. Capitalism is a wasteful system. Money just stays in the bank. What we want to do is get money moving around the economy. So if we give everybody $25, they'll spend money, it'll kickstart the economy. Eventually, he wants to create Alberta dollars to do this. It's found unconstitutional. So the very principle of his party that it's based on doesn't work. So how do farmers create solutions for problems in the Depression? Well, first of all, workers create the On to Ottawa trek that we talked about. Farmers decide on their farms to create things like tree screens so that wind can't blow away their crops. They start planting poplar trees, and you'll see that in the prairies today. They dig irrigation ditches as part of the work camp projects. They also practice crop rotation like they have for quite some time. They also engage in something called stubble and trash farming. Stubble farming means instead of taking all of the stalks of wheat out of the ground, you actually take the wheat but leave the stalks in so they decompose, they add nutrients to the ground, but there's also something in the ground, so if the wind comes, it can't blow away the dirt because there's something rooting it there. Trash farming is one of the same principles. Instead of taking all the stalks and destroying them, you leave the stalks of wheat in the ground and then you till them into the ground so that they decompose into the ground and stay there. So the ground looks kind of gross. It's full of all sorts of decomposing material. That's actually good for it. Some of the political solutions we talked about are the work camps, the 5-cent speech, the New Deal, and trying to give money to people when Bennett does. Finally, we looked at elections and independence. So we looked at the Treaty of Versailles, the Chanak Crisis, the Halibut Treaty, the King Byng Crisis, the Imperial Conference, the Balfour Report, and the Statute of Westminster, which occurred during this time period. So first of all, the Treaty of Versailles proves that Canada is becoming more independent in 1919 because we actually signed the treaty by ourselves, which ends World War I. Officially, Britain would usually be the one that would sign the treaty for us. Second thing in Canada's drive towards independence that we learned about was the Chanak Crisis. So Britain encounters a crisis in the port of Chanak in Turkey and says, Canada, come help us. We say, no, we're gonna vote on this first. We're gonna decide. By the time Canada does decide to go, Britain's already, the crisis is over. The next thing we learned about was the Halibut Treaty. Not a hugely important treaty. It's between the United States and Canada to protect fisheries off the coast of British Columbia and Alaska. And the only thing that's really interesting about this is that we signed it by ourselves without even asking the British ambassador in Washington to do it, and they would be normally the ones that do it. So it shows we're becoming independent. The next is the King Byng Crisis. It's a complicated crisis we learned about in class in great detail. Suffice to say, Byng and King get into a fight. So King is our Prime Minister, Byng is our Governor General, and what this fight about is who actually gets the most say in Canadian politics. At this time period, General Byng actually goes against King when asking for an election and says you can't have an election. From this point onwards, King runs his next election on the idea, the principle that he should be able, the Governor General should be able to tell him not to have an election. He should be able to call one whenever he wants. Finally, in Canada's drive towards independence in this time period, we're going to look at politically independent are the Imperial Conference, the Balfour Report, and the Statute of Westminster. At the Imperial Conference, the Dominions get together, all the old colonies of Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the Irish Free State, Canada, Newfoundland, and Britain, and they say we want more autonomy. We want to be able to run our own affairs. The Balfour Report is eventually commissioned, which says, yeah, these are pretty reasonable. England at this time period wants to get rid of its colonies in a way because it doesn't want to defend them anymore and pay for them. So it says, yeah, we agree with this too. The Statute of Westminster. Now always remember, a statute is a law. It's not a marble carved item or anything like that. Statute means a law, and the Statute of Westminster said all of these dominions, all of these colonies are now dominions. We're going to form a commonwealth where we're all equal to Britain. You can make your own laws. Now Canada eventually does not decide on an amending formula, so they can't actually amend their constitution without having Britain do it for them or sign off on it. And that's one small way that we're not quite independent yet, which we're going to look at as we move through the century here. Finally, last thing we want to talk about is the Group of Seven. So the Group of Seven is a group of artists that really show Canada is becoming independent culturally, not just politically, and we are becoming more dependent on the U.S. economically and their culture, etc. But the Group of Seven actually paints Canadian landscapes, etc.
Please excuse the interruption before the break. The cafeteria is serving eggs.